Welcome back, I'm Shane and this is Relative Time. When it comes to Homage watches, there are a ton of subbies out there. After all, it's one of the most iconic dive watches ever made, so it kinda makes sense that there would be. Yet it's been quite some time since I last looked at one on this channel. And that's kinda been on purpose. Not that there's anything wrong with a subby Homage, it's just after looking at a number of them, and including some of the better ones out there, I felt like I just saw enough, and I started to lose interest. At least that was until I ran across some images of this one, the SN004-G Retro Diver, which is kind of an homage to the subbies of the late 50s, and from that, my curiosity was piqued. Although, to be honest, most of that curiosity is due to two specific things, and not so much of it being an homage. The first is that I really wanted to take a look at this cool rivet-style bracelet, and the other is that it's made by San Martin. San Martin is one of the best Chinese watch brands on AliExpress, and they even have their own site now. A long time ago I checked out one of their fleegers, and I came away pretty impressed. So I've been meaning to come back to the brand for quite some time now, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. Now, there's a much longer story about how I came to do this review, but the short version is I wound up emailing San Martin's website, as I had some questions and concerns about this specific watch. I told them who I was, but I wasn't even asking for a watch to review, so I wasn't even really expecting to hear back from them. But I did. And one of the things they mentioned was that they had a version of this watch with a new bracelet coming soon, and they offered to give me one to review. Now, obviously I said yes, otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you right now, but I'm mentioning it here just for the sake of transparency, and why that sponsor tag was listed in the beginning. In keeping with that retro theming, the watch here is just a touch on the smaller side compared to today's divers. So it's sitting right at 38mm without and 41.3 with the crown. Combine that with a fairly narrow lug-to-lug of just under 46, and you have a perfect sized diver for those with slender wrists. Or just anyone who's been complaining of too many watches over 40mm. Total thickness is also pretty good for a 200-meter diver, as it's sitting right at 13mm. And that does include the case spec and a single domed sapphire crystal. Rounding out those specs, you also have a 20mm lug width, ceramic bezel, Seiko NH35A movement, and a total weight around 140 grams with its bracelet. Now, even though I said this would be perfect for those with slender wrists, really anyone should be able to wear it. And here it sits squarely on my wrist. It's nicely balanced, and the end links start the bracelet right at the natural curvature of my 7-inch wrist. So overall pretty comfy. And that's really one of the reasons people love subbies. It's just a very comfortable and functional platform. And even though 38mm here is a little smaller than I'd personally prefer, this one has a great presence thanks to that gilded color scheme. The case itself is very subby-like, nice linear brushing on the side and top, and that also helps the end links of the bracelet mesh perfectly in with the case. You also have these narrow polished chamfered edges that run the length of each side. So it's pretty much a subby. Overall, the finishing here is pretty nice, at least for the price. But one disappointing factor I found is that the bottom edge has a sharper feel to it. And also disappointing is the closed case back. It's very blank and pretty generic-y. Now, one of the departures from a modern sub is the lack of crown guards. But that is keeping it vintage and gives the watch a slimmer feel, as you can have a narrower crown. The crown is signed, screwed in, and fairly easy to use. Although I'm not entirely sure the San Martin shark logo here really works with the design, but that's kind of a minor thing. Which brings us to the bezel, and the bezel is excellent. The width is 39mm, so is just slightly wider than the case itself. It's 120 click, unidirectional, and a great action, with a nice tactile response and no backplay. The insert is a black glossy ceramic, and that should give it more scratch resistant than your standard aluminum. As well as it just looks terrific with the black and gold color scheme. Although one thing I noticed is that the glossy finish doesn't quite blend as well with the matte finish on the dial, so it never really seems as a continuation of that dial, and more as a frame surrounding it. Sitting above the dial, we also have a nice single domed sapphire crystal with AR coating. Looking straight at it, it's very clear, but as you get to the extreme angles, there is a little bit of a distortion, which in some ways can elevate that vintage feel. Now, as you would expect, the dial design here is that of a sub, as you have dots with bars and an upside down triangle at the 12. While not the most original, it is a time-tested design, and there are reasons that people keep coming back to it. Although there are some things here that separate it from your typical Homage. With the smaller size, the gilded color scheme, the lack of crown guards, the half train track chapter ring, as well as the riveted bracelet, by today's standards, I think this thing has more in common with a Black Bay 58 than your modern sub. Some other differences here is that nothing is applied. It's all a thick application of paint. Most of the watch is made up with gold accents, and the indices have that off-yellow, kind of old radium look to them. Another difference is the dial has this flat black and almost chalkboard-like look to it, which is kind of a far departure from the typical glossy or sunburst dial you would almost expect. And in some ways that is kind of a good thing, as I think it helps it stay true to the tool watch roots of its design, rather than the slightly dressier status symbol it's become. Yet even though this has more of a tool watch look, it's not completely devoid of flash, and it has a pretty good presence on the wrist. It's just here that flash is more focused on the ceramic bezel and the reflective gold outline on the hands. Now, as you would expect, they went with the Mercedes handset here. It's completely fitting, so this isn't really a complaint, but I've never really been a fan of them. So in some ways I wish they went even further back and maybe used the sword hands from the very first sub. There is a sterile dial version as well as this one, but even the non-sterile one we have here doesn't seem too crowded. Evidently, one advantage of going vintage is that you don't have your typical wall of text. You have the San Martin logo at the top in cursive, and water resistance and automatic at the bottom, so pretty much the bare minimum you would expect. Now on to the lume, and San Martin has become known for having really good lume. So I kind of had some high expectations, but I also know that that old radium style of lume isn't always the best when it comes to performance. And unfortunately, that's what we see here. Now, I wouldn't say that this is bad, it's just okay for a diver. As you can see that it fades out just a little bit before the Seiko Turtle, which is pretty much what I've been seeing with other watches that have that old radium style paint. As for the movement, well, we have a Seiko NH35A. Pretty much what you'd want at this price range, as it's your standard workhorse movement. Standard beat rate, 42-hour power reserve, hacking, and hand winding. The only downside here is that it has the so-called phantom date. And that's where the movement still has its date function, but it's just being covered up by the dial. It's not the best way of doing this, but it doesn't really hurt anything either. On to the bracelet, which is honestly quite good for the price. It's basically a standard oyster style bracelet, with these additional polished riveted platforms on either side. The bracelet starts at 20mm and then tapers down to 16 before the clasp, which I think is one of the reasons that this watch is so comfortable on the wrist. The finishing of the bracelet is great and it matches the case perfectly. You have nice solid end links, and a milled push button clasp. And that clasp is complete with the San Martin logo that's etched into it. Although if you run your fingers across that logo, it is a little bit sharp. Now, sizing the watch can be tricky, as you need a screwdriver on either side of the link. But once you kind of get the hang of it, it's not really a big deal. This is the newer version of the bracelet, and as far as I know, there were only two big changes. The first is that the screws were made a little bit smaller. I think that makes the bracelet look just a little bit nicer. But the other one is the big one, and that's that the first link from the micro adjust was made a little bit longer. On the previous version, there was a problem where you couldn't use the first two micro adjustment holes. But here they made that first link a little bit longer, so it's not an issue. So in terms of value, you're looking at a price here around $230, which as AliExpress watches go is a little on the higher side. But overall pretty good for everything you're getting, as you are talking a good finish, great bracelet, sapphire, and ceramic. In fact, quality-wise, and I'm kind of going off memory here, I want to say that this is pretty close to what you see from Steinhardt, at about half the price. Not to mention that this is definitely a step up from other entry-level subs, like say the Invicta Pro Diver. In fact, I think this is one of the best subbies I've seen, let alone the best vintage subby. So if you're on the hunt for something more retro, this could be a good option. Or if you do have smaller wrists and are kind of hunting for that elusive, smaller diver, well, this is one to definitely look at. Overall, it's a nice watch and a great one for the price. You have good build quality, it's a comfortable size, and a great classic look. I wish the Lume was a little bit better, but if you're looking for a subby, I don't think you can go wrong here. Now, has this turned me into a subby fan? Not really, but I've actually got more of an interest in a Black Bay now. Anyway, let me know down below what you think of the San Martin Retro Diver, or if you'd be interested in seeing this GMT version. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Till next time.